me, solidarity is the opposite of privilege.
It's the act of being selfless and showing compassion.
Either an action or maybe a gesture.
It is directly related to empathy.
People who feel the same try to take collective action.
Ciao. Hey.
Hola.
Hola. Welcome to our podcast, Voices of Solidarity. We are Ilaria,
Jessica,
Juan,
and Manuela.
In this episode, we're going to talk about practices and expressions of solidarity that emerge in the context of humanitarian emergencies. You know, like the one happening in Ukraine right now.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Sounds like an interesting topic.
Yeah, so maybe a little bit of context before starting the conversation. After weeks of tensions, you probably know, Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, leading to a war and millions of people forced to leave their home.
Because of the war and these displacements, actually, we have all seen that in the past 2 months, the blue and yellow colors of the Ukrainian flag have become a familiar sight of solidarity. I don't know, guys, if you follow Hollywood stars, but Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher, they raised $18 million in support of the Ukrainians.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, I mean, it's been all over. For example, the Balenciaga show during Paris Fashion Week dedicated its catwalk to Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, even in sports. I don't know if you saw Andrei Rublev, this tennis. He wrote on a camera, "No war, please," after winning a match in Dubai Championship. But now he's been banned from all other competitions.
Oh, because he's Russian, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God. So controversial.
Yeah.
That's another topic
to talk about later, yeah.
Well, in any case, guys, people in Europe and across the world have shown that they are really ready to take action, no? And to donate to support the Ukrainian population.
It's impressive how this enormous mobilization to help Ukrainian people. But I think that also we have to ask ourselves, is solidarity the same in every situation?
Yeah, to answer that question, for this podcast, we decided to interview people from all over the world, from different ages, from different backgrounds, and that have a different understanding of solidarity and also how they express it. So should we go with the interviews or?
Well. Before we go to the interviews, before we listen to this, I actually want to bring this question to the table, guys. What is solidarity for you? Just using one word. For example, I will start. I guess I would have to choose community, because for me, solidarity is about nurturing a sense of community.
Well, for me, I think I choose solidarity is empathy.
I really like your words, guys, but I would say humanity. And you? What about you?
I will go with 3 words if I can. So for me, supporting one another.
Well, I didn't say you could use 3 words, but I will let it go.
Thank you.
But anyway, guys, I think it's really interesting to hear all of you because the people we talked to actually mentioned the words you mentioned. So, for example, empathy, compassion, selfless attitude, equality, and humanity were listed around these different people. And what is more interesting for me is that all of these words are also closely related to Rosacu's argument on how solidarity is shaped by moral ideas of how people should relate and on how society should be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, I mean, it really seems that people relate solidarity to doing good and that we engage in forms of solidarity because it is just the right thing to do so, no?
Okay, so if solidarity is based on moral values, how do you express it? Maybe now we can listen to the interviews.
Yeah, now we can.
There are many different ways to express solidarity. For example, we can help our colleagues when they are in need. We can also fight for rights.
Supported, loaded boxes, cooked some food, being a friend of the affected.
Taking part into crowdfundings or sending messages if it's people I know, or maybe donating stuff.
Listening to how people have expressed solidarity in different ways all around the world is really inspiring. Juan, what's your opinion about that?
I can definitely relate to some of these experiences, especially those that talk about donations or collections for vulnerable communities. I do remember it happening on my home country in Colombia. For example, during the quarantine, many people organized donations to help rural communities mainly. And I would also like to add that it's interesting how some of the interviews pointed to a to the sensation or like a feeling or an emotion. So what do you think?
Yeah, actually, through that interviews, we were really able to hear different expression of solidarity as well, and in different countries like Peru, Haiti, Fiji, or Syria. It really seems that in many situations, people link solidarity to their personal experiences. Some others also mention Ukraine. How do you think that actually these recent events have changed people's perception of solidarity?
I would have to say that some interviewees mention a surge of solidarity mainly directed to our fellow Europeans. And I think this is closely related to what the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, mentioned when the war began. I don't know if you heard what she said, but if not, let's just listen it now.
This is not just about Ukraine. It's a clash of two worlds, two polar set of values. This is a clash between the rule of law and the rule of the gun, between democracies and autocracies, between a rules-based order and a world of naked aggression. How we respond today to what Russia is doing will determine the future of the international system.
Well, I think very interesting, and I can definitely agree with her. I mean, we also love how more and more people seem to be deeply committed to showing solidarity with Ukraine, and many of them start donating or even volunteering for the first time.
I guess that related to what we heard from all these different people. I feel that Europe is usually perceived as a democratic, developed actor. So when a part of it is at war, everyone feels like European democratic values are being threatened.
I guess it also comes from a notion or perception of how close this war is to Europe, geographically speaking.
Well, now that you mentioned this, Manuel, I would like to share the words of a BBC journalist with you. I don't know if you already heard them, but I think it really opens a new discussion.
Me, I'm sorry. It's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed, children being killed every day with Putin's missiles.
Well, that was uncomfortable to hear, but clearly there is an inherent racial bias in this journalist. And he doesn't even realize it, like it comes so naturally. And the worst thing is that I doubt it is an isolated opinion.
Exactly. I think it's widely shared and people just don't really realize how racist this view is.
I also believe that exactly from this view or of the understanding of the world and conflict between global north and south, and the racial biases, the notion of humanitarian aid was born. It was born as something that the more developed countries provide to the least developed countries to relieve them from the horrors of conflict, dictatorship, war, famine, etc., etc.
That's an interesting point. Actually, I would like to ask a question to you three. Will you say that humanitarian aid and solidarity are related?
I see solidarity as a feeling and humanitarian aid as the actual practical aspect of it.
There is a relation between solidarity and humanitarian aid.
Humanitarian aid is related to solidarity.
Humanitarian aid automatically is a form of solidarity.
Yeah, I would like to quote one person we talked to, as he mentioned that solidarity is a feeling of compassion, while humanitarian aid is the practical approach to this feeling. I think it's a very interesting idea, but solidarity and humanitarian aid also work in different ways. For instance, as we mentioned before, solidarity also relates to our feelings, while humanitarian aid should also align with the principle of humanity, independence, impartiality, and neutrality.
Yes, I agree, but solidarity seems to be an inherent component of humanitarian aid. Let's listen to the response of a Red Cross employee on this matter.
Solidarity is not actually a principle fundamental for the Red Cross. I would say that solidarity is the thing that pushes you to help the other. And then the way you have to help the other is by humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence.
Yeah, I also believe that solidarity is fundamental for humanitarian aid work. Maybe I will propose to better understand the relationship. We listen to the humanitarian aid workers maybe what they have to say about the work or solidarity in general or the Ukrainian war.
For me, solidarity is a verb, and it means to understand and help one another. In general as well, I think the most common expression of solidarity is volunteering, and maybe also protest. Since the start of the Ukraine crisis, there has been an incredible rise in solidarity in Italy and overall in Europe, and however, specifically towards one group, everyone connected instantly to the needs of the Ukrainian population, and this awareness directly translated into action. But unfortunately, we don't see this kind of rapid and generous response very often. And this made easier raising awareness and expressing solidarity overall. And not only by donating, actually, to support local organizations, but people opened up their homes to refugees coming from Ukraine in a way that never seemed possible before. Humanitarian aid is a form of rapid and short-term assistance to people who need help in situation of crisis. Solidarity is part of my work in many ways. As I'm working in international cooperation, solidarity is at the very core of every project and every activity we do. At the very start of the Ukraine crisis, my organization decided to immediately start to raise funds and repurpose the emergency fund to use it to support local organizations in Ukraine.
So we could say that while implementing humanitarian aid activities, humanitarians should follow specific principles such as neutrality, impartiality, and independence, leaving personal feelings of solidarity outside of their work.
Yeah, but are humanitarian aid principles really always respected? I mean, can you really separate your personal biases from your work?
A good question.
I believe we should acknowledge and recognize that there are double standards in every humanitarian response.
Double standards is something that Médecins Sans Frontières, they post a video really about this. I think it would be interesting also to talk about this video because they really comment on Ursula von der Leyen's statement, showing also how Europe has always had the means to respond to urgent humanitarian crises. For example, I mean, we all have seen this like with the fast mobilization for Ukrainian people. But what lacks sometimes is also the political will. Let's listen to their words.
The EU has always had the tools to provide a humane and dignified reception for all those seeking safety. Its response to Ukrainian refugees shows that. All that was missing was the political will.
It's really powerful. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And actually, it also relates to another question that we asked to our interviewees, namely whether they see any difference between the current response and what happened in 2015.
I think the response to the 2015 refugee crisis, speaking of Europe and the West more broadly, has been absolutely horrendous. What is happening today is great, and I hope it can serve as a benchmark for future crises, no matter where people are coming from, no matter where the crisis is happening. The differences between the 2015 crisis and what we're seeing today and the reaction of Europe in the media and individuals is reflective of Europe's deep-seated prejudices, in particular racism and xenophobia.
I hope that the fact that it's happening in Europe will make people aware that like expressing solidarity in humanitarian crisis can happen to any of us.
Well, definitely it was very interesting to hear all these different views and perceptions of solidarity and humanitarian aid. I definitely think that the situation in Ukraine has exhibited the structural racism that still permeates in today's European society, and actually I think in every society in the world. Perceptions of solidarity and humanitarian aid are still anchored in representations of a developed global north and a poor and vulnerable global south caught in permanent war and conflict. But yeah, hopefully this situation that we just experienced between Ukraine and other crises becomes an eye-opener for what's missing and what's left to do. But before we close this episode, I would like to ask you guys if you like to have some finishing remarks.
Yes, actually, thank you, Jessica. If I can start. I do believe that based on our exchanges, I learned how expressions of solidarity vary significantly according to context. However, we must avoid being Eurocentric. I think this should be one of the main points. especially by forgetting the sufferings of millions of people affected by war or natural disasters or even epidemics in several geographic areas outside Europe. So, in other words, all those crises which have been forgotten since the war started in Ukraine, as mentioned by some interviews, I do hope that the current mobilization will contribute to better responses in the future, regardless where they happen.
Yeah, actually, I think that most people were able to recognize a connection between humanitarian aid and solidarity. However, it seems that solidarity is easier to practice when the person is closer to the emergency or feels closer to it, while when they feel disconnected or that the emergency is far away from them, it's just easier to assume that someone else will deal with the problem, and usually this someone else end up being humanitarian workers.
Yeah, of course. But if humanitarian aid and solidarity are somehow related, we should also ensure that both activities are not shaped by our biases about race, gender, or nationality. I mean, I believe, but I think you all agree with me, that everyone deserves assistance and protection as well as our solidarity.
Yeah.
And actually, I would only like to close my intervention by quoting Nicola Govoni. I don't know if you know him, guys. He's the founder of an NGO working in refugee camps in Greece. And actually comment this situation by saying, for us, who were born in the total indifference of the Greek concentration camps, this is shocking but positive. Why positive? Because the Ukrainian crisis is crushing proof that acceptance is possible, and not just in theory, but in practice, here in Europe today, with the resources available. Because welcoming refugees is right, flags as profile pictures are okay, the peace marches as well. Everything we are doing towards Ukrainians is the right thing to do. Finally, it's just wrong not to do it for all the others.
Now, you said Niccolo Govoni?
Nicola Govoni, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think Niccolo couldn't have phrased it better. And I guess with that little quote from him, we're going to close this episode. Thank you guys for being here today. Thank you to all our interviewees, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.